The wagon lurched to a halt in front of the weathered church on a sweltering August afternoon in 1882, and Zachary Wilson watched from across the dusty street as a woman in a travel-worn dress stepped down with movements so graceful they seemed impossible after 3 months of rough frontier travel. She looked utterly lost, her dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar buildings of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, with an expression that made something twist inside his chest. He had been leaning against the post outside the general store, taking a rare break from his cattle ranch work, when the mail-order bride wagon arrived, and he knew without being told that this woman was meant for Jacob Crawford, the banker who had advertised back east for a wife. Zachary pushed himself off the post and started walking toward the church without really thinking about it. He was 26 years old, had been working cattle since he was 14, and had never felt the urge to send away for a bride himself. The whole practice seemed strange to him, choosing a woman from a photograph and a letter, but he understood loneliness well enough. This was hard country and good women were scarce. Still, watching this particular woman descend from that wagon, he felt an unexpected surge of something he could not quite name. The wagon driver was gesturing toward the church, speaking in loud, slow English as if volume would somehow make her understand better. The woman nodded politely, but her eyes held a glassy quality that told Zachary she had not understood a single word. She clutched a small leather bag to her chest and smoothed her dark hair with one trembling hand. "She does not speak English," the driver said to Reverend Matthews, who had emerged from the church. "The agency said she was from somewhere in Europe, Poland, I think, or maybe Russia. They said Crawford knew what he was getting." The Reverend frowned. "Jacob is supposed to arrive this evening." "Did the agency send any papers?" While they discussed logistics, Zachary found himself moving closer. The woman had stepped to the side, clearly trying to stay out of the way, and she was looking at the Ozark Mountains rising in the distance with an expression of such profound homesickness that it made his throat tighten. He stopped a few feet away from her, and when her eyes met his, something passed between them that needed no translation. "Madam," he said quietly, touching the brim of his hat. She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, and he saw wariness there, but also a desperate hope. She said something in a language he did not recognize, her voice soft and musical despite the obvious question in her tone. Zachary shook his head slowly. "I do not understand your words," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "but your eyes already told me enough. You are scared and tired, and you are wondering what kind of place you have come to." She tilted her head slightly, and though she could not have understood his words any more than he understood hers, something in her posture relaxed a fraction. She touched her chest and said, "Sophia Mazur." "Sophia," he repeated, and was rewarded with the smallest hint of a smile. He touched his own chest. "Zachary Wilson. Most folks call me Zach." "Zach," she tried, the sound slightly different in her accent but close enough that it made him smile. The Reverend approached them. "Mr. Wilson, good of you to come greet the new arrival. Jacob Crawford should be here by evening to claim his bride. In the meantime, I suppose she can wait at the church." Zachary looked at the small church building, then at Sophia, who was starting to sway slightly on her feet. "She looks about ready to collapse, Reverend. When did she last eat?" "I could not tell you. The driver says they have been traveling for days. Then she needs food and rest before anything else." Zachary made a decision that surprised him even as he spoke. "My sister runs the boarding house 2 streets over. I will take her there, make sure she is settled and fed. You can send Crawford over when he arrives." The Reverend looked uncertain. "I do not know if that is proper." "What is not proper is leaving a woman who can barely stand on her feet waiting in a church for hours," Zachary said firmly. "My sister will chaperone. Everything will be respectable." Before the Reverend could argue further, Zachary turned to Sophia. He mimed eating and sleeping, pointing toward the boarding house. She watched his gestures carefully, then nodded. When he offered his arm, she hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her hand was small and rough with calluses, the hand of someone who knew hard work. As they walked down the main street of Eureka Springs, Zachary was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. This was a small town, and news traveled fast. By evening, everyone would know that Zach Wilson had taken Crawford's mail-order bride to his sister's boarding house. Let them talk. The woman beside him needed help, and he had never been one to leave someone in need just because it might cause gossip. The boarding house was a neat two-story building with a wide porch. Zachary's sister Catherine was sweeping the steps when they approached, and her eyes widened when she saw them. "Zach, what in the world?" "This is Sophia Mazur," he said. "She just arrived on the mail-order wagon for Jacob Crawford, but she does not speak a word of English and she is about to fall over. Can you get her a room and some food?" Catherine set down her broom immediately. She was 30 years old, a widow who had taken over the boarding house after her husband died in a mining accident 5 years back. She and Zachary had always been close, and she could read him better than anyone. Right now she was looking at him with a knowing expression that made him uncomfortable. "Of course," she said. Then to Sophia she spoke more slowly. "Come with me, dear. Let us get you settled." Sophia looked at Zachary uncertainly, and he nodded encouragement. She seemed to understand that these people meant her no harm, because she followed Catherine inside. Zachary found himself trailing after them, telling himself he just wanted to make sure she was truly all right. Catherine led them to a small room on the first floor, clean and simply furnished with a bed, washstand, and chair. Sophia set down her bag and looked around with an expression of relief. She turned to Catherine and spoke in her own language, clearly trying to express gratitude. "You are welcome, dear," Catherine said, then looked at Zachary. "Stay here. I will bring up some food." When they were alone, Sophia moved to the washstand and poured water into the basin. She splashed it on her face, and Zachary saw years of travel dust running off her skin. When she looked up, droplets clinging to her eyelashes, she was even more beautiful than he had first thought. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw that suggested strength beneath the obvious exhaustion. She pointed to him, then to the door, and he understood she was asking if he was leaving. He shook his head and sat in the chair, trying to convey that he would stay until she had eaten. The relief on her face made it clear she was grateful not to be alone yet. Catherine returned with a tray loaded with bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apple pie. Sophia's eyes widened at the sight of the food, and when Catherine set it on the small table, she spoke rapidly in her own language, gesturing between the food and the door as if asking about payment. "No charge," Catherine said firmly, pantomiming giving freely. "Eat." Sophia ate with careful politeness, but Zachary could tell she was ravenous. She consumed everything on the plate while he and Catherine watched, exchanging glances. When she finished, she looked at them both and placed her hand over her heart, bowing her head slightly. The gesture needed no translation. "She is Crawford's intended?" Catherine asked quietly. "That is what the wagon driver said. And how does she seem to you about that prospect?" Zachary looked at Sophia, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes starting to drift closed despite her obvious effort to stay awake. "I do not think she knows anything about the man she is supposed to marry. I do not think anyone explained much of anything to her." Catherine's expression turned grim. "Jacob Crawford is not a bad man, but he is not a particularly warm one either. This poor girl does not know what she is in for." That is her business and his, Zachary said, but the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. He stood up. I should go. Send word when Crawford arrives. But as he moved toward the door, Sophia's eyes snapped open and she stood quickly, reaching out as if to stop him. She said something urgent in her language, and he did not need a translator to understand she did not want to be left alone yet. I will stay a while longer, he heard himself say. He sat back down and Sophia visibly relaxed. Within minutes, exhaustion overtook her fear, and she curled up on the bed, still fully dressed, and fell into what looked like a deep sleep. Catherine gestured for Zachary to follow her into the hallway. You are playing with fire, little brother. I am just helping someone in need. You are looking at another man's bride to be like she hung the moon and stars. Zachary felt his face heat. I do not know what you are talking about. Yes, you do. I saw the way you looked at her. I saw the way she looked at you too. There is something between you already, language barrier or not. She just arrived. She is scared and lost. What you are seeing is simple human compassion. Catherine crossed her arms. If you say so. But Zach, be careful. Jacob Crawford paid good money to bring that girl here. He has legal papers and everything. If you interfere. I am not interfering with anything, Zachary said firmly. When Crawford gets here, she will go with him and that will be that. I am just making sure she is taken care of until then. His sister looked skeptical, but dropped the subject. Zachary returned to the chair in Sophia's room and told himself he was only staying to make sure she rested safely. But the truth was, he could not make himself leave. There was something about her that drew him in, some quality that went beyond her physical beauty. Perhaps it was her courage in coming so far to an unknown land, or the vulnerability mixed with strength he saw in her eyes. Whatever it was, Zachary Wilson found himself sitting in that chair watching her sleep, and feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope. The sun was setting when Jacob Crawford finally arrived at the boarding house. Zachary had dozed off in the chair, and he woke to the sound of heavy footsteps on the porch. Catherine's voice drifted up from below, speaking to someone in clipped tones. Then Crawford's voice, impatient and annoyed. Sophia stirred on the bed, and Zachary watched as she opened her eyes and looked around, momentarily confused about where she was. Then she saw him and seemed to remember. She sat up slowly, pushing her dark hair back from her face. The door opened and Catherine entered, followed by Jacob Crawford. He was a man of 45, thick around the middle, with thinning hair and shrewd eyes. He was wealthy by Eureka Springs standards, owning the only bank in town and several properties besides. He dressed well and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. There you are, Crawford said, looking at Sophia with an expression that was more appraising than warm. You are the one they sent. I suppose you will do. Sophia stood up, smoothing her wrinkled dress. She looked at Crawford, then at Zachary, and he saw confusion and something else in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or disappointment. She spoke in her language, gesturing uncertainly. She does not speak English, Zachary said, standing. Did the agency tell you that? They mentioned it, Crawford said dismissively. I figured she would learn, does not matter much anyway. I need a wife to cook and clean and give me children. She does not need to recite poetry to do that. The casual way he spoke made Zachary's jaw tighten. She is a person, Crawford, not a piece of property. Crawford's eyes narrowed. She is going to be my wife, Wilson, which makes her my concern. I appreciate you looking after her, but I will take it from here. He pulled some papers from his coat pocket. I have the contract right here. She agreed to marry me in exchange for passage to America, all legal and proper. Sophia was watching the exchange with growing distress. She could not understand the words, but she clearly sensed the tension. When Crawford reached for her arm, she pulled back instinctively. "See what you have done," Crawford snapped at Zachary. "You have made her think she has choices here." "Girl," he said to Sophia, speaking loudly and slowly, "you are coming with me. We are getting married. Tomorrow." Sophia looked at Zachary, her eyes pleading. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He had spent his whole life being responsible, doing the right thing, following the rules. But looking at this woman who had traveled thousands of miles to escape whatever hardship she had faced, only to be claimed by a man who saw her as nothing more than unpaid labor, he knew he could not just stand by. "Maybe you should give her some time to adjust," Zachary said carefully. "She just got here. She does not know you, does not know this place. Let her stay here at the boarding house for a few days, get her bearings." "Absolutely not," Crawford said. "I paid for her passage and I have the legal right to claim her. We are getting married tomorrow at the church, and then she comes home with me. End of discussion." "Maybe ask her what she wants," Zachary suggested. Crawford laughed without humor. "How exactly do you propose I do that when she does not speak the language? Besides, it does not matter what she wants. She signed the contract. That is the end of it." Sophia spoke then, her voice stronger than before. She pointed at Crawford, then shook her head firmly. She pointed at Zachary, then at herself, and said something that sounded almost like a question. "She seems to have made her preference clear," Catherine observed quietly. "Her preference is irrelevant," Crawford snapped. He pulled out a purse and counted out several bills. "Here, Mrs. Duncan, payment for the room and the food. Now, girl, get your things. You are coming with me." When he reached for Sophia's arm again, she stepped back and spoke rapidly, her voice rising. Zachary moved between them without thinking. "She is clearly distressed," he said. "You cannot force her." "I have a legal contract," Crawford said, his face reddening. "Sheriff Garrett will back me up on this. That woman owes me marriage, or she owes me the cost of her passage, which I guarantee she cannot pay. Those are her choices." The situation was spiraling, and Zachary knew he needed to think fast. An idea came to him, reckless and probably foolish, but it was the only thing he could think of. "What if someone else paid her passage cost?" he asked. Crawford's eyes widened. "What are you saying, Wilson?" "I am saying, what if I reimbursed you for whatever you spent to bring her here? Then she would be free of obligation to you. And then what? She becomes your problem instead, maybe," Zachary said. "Or maybe she just becomes a free woman who can make her own choices." Crawford stared at him. "You are serious? You would pay hundreds of dollars for a woman you just met and cannot even talk to?" When he put it like that, it did sound insane. But Zachary thought about Sophia's eyes when she first stepped off that wagon, the courage it must have taken to come so far, and he knew he could not let her be trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who saw her as property. "How much?" Zachary asked. Crawford named a sum that made Catherine gasp. It was nearly everything Zachary had saved from 3 years of hard work on his ranch. It would set him back significantly, maybe force him to sell some of his cattle. But looking at Sophia's face, seeing the hope dawning there even though she could not fully understand what was happening, he knew what his answer had to be. "Done," he said. "I will have the money for you tomorrow." Crawford looked stunned, then calculating. "You are a fool, Wilson. But if you want to waste your savings on damaged goods, that is your business. I want cash, not promises." "You will get your cash," Zachary said. "In the meantime, she stays here." "Fine. But Wilson, when this blows up in your face, do not come crying to me." Crawford shoved the contract papers back in his pocket and stormed out of the room. In the silence that followed, Sophia looked at Zachary with questions written all over her face. He had no idea how to explain what had just happened, but he tried. He pointed at Crawford's retreating back, then shook his head. He pointed at Sophia, then made a gesture like breaking chains. He pointed at himself, then at her, then held out his hands palm up, trying to convey that she was free. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She said something in her language, her voice thick with emotion, and then she did something that surprised him completely. She crossed the small distance between them and hugged him, her head barely reaching his shoulder. Zachary froze for a moment, then carefully put his arms around her, feeling her shake with what he thought might be relieved sobs. "What have you done, Zach?" Catherine asked softly, but there was no judgment in her voice, only concern. "I have no idea," he admitted, "but it felt right." That night, Zachary lay awake in his small house on the outskirts of town, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he had lost his mind. He had just committed to spending nearly all his savings on a woman he could not communicate with, a woman who was a stranger in every sense of the word. It made no logical sense, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia's face when Crawford had tried to claim her. He saw the fear and desperation, and then the hope when Zachary had intervened. He had told himself he was just being compassionate, just helping someone in need. But Catherine was right. There was more to it than that. From the moment he had seen Sophia step off that wagon, something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. He had felt a connection that transcended language, a recognition that seemed to bypass all rational thought. When their eyes had met, he had felt like he was seeing something he had been searching for without even knowing he was looking. The next morning, Zachary rode to the bank and withdrew the money he had saved. It hurt to see his account reduced to almost nothing, but he did not hesitate. He found Crawford at his large house on the hill and handed over the cash. "Count it," Zachary said. "Make sure it is all there." Crawford counted carefully, then nodded. "It is all here." He pulled out the contract and wrote something across it. "There. She is released from her obligation to me." "You are the biggest fool I have ever met, Wilson, but that is your problem now." Zachary took the marked contract and rode back to town. At the boarding house, he found Sophia sitting on the porch with Catherine, who was attempting to teach her some basic English words. Sophia looked up when he approached, and the smile that lit her face made every dollar he had spent feel worth it. He sat down on the porch steps and showed her the contract with Crawford's release written across it. She could not read English, but she understood documents well enough to grasp that this meant something important. She looked at him questioningly. Catherine spoke up. "Zach paid your passage debt to Crawford. You do not owe him anything now. You are free to make your own choices." Of course, Sophia did not understand the words, but Zachary did his best with gestures. He pointed at the contract, then at Crawford's house on the hill, then made an X with his arms. "No more Crawford." Then he pointed at her and made a gesture like a bird flying free. Sophia's eyes widened. She touched the contract, then looked at Zachary with an expression of such profound gratitude and something else, something that made his heart race, that he had to look away. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Zachary would come to the boarding house every morning before heading to his ranch. Catherine had given Sophia work helping with the cleaning and cooking in exchange for her room and board, and Sophia had thrown herself into the work with determination. She was trying to learn English, picking up words here and there, and Zachary found himself inventing reasons to stay longer each day, teaching her names for things, listening to her musical attempts to pronounce English words. They communicated through gestures, drawings, and the few words she learned. But more than that, they communicated through looks and smiles, through the way her eyes would seek him out when he entered a room, through the way his entire day felt brighter when he was near her. "You are courting her," Catherine said one evening after Sophia had gone to bed. "You know that, right?" "I am just helping her adjust," Zachary protested. "Zach, you ride into town every single day. You spend hours here teaching her English. You bring her wildflowers. You watch her like she is the only person in the room. That is courting. Zachary could not deny it any longer. What if it is? Is that so wrong? It is not wrong, but it is complicated. She does not speak the language. She does not understand our customs. How do you even know if she feels the same way? I know, Zachary said quietly. I cannot explain how, but I know. Catherine sighed. Then what are you waiting for? If you want to court her properly, you need to make your intentions clear. But how did you court someone when you could barely communicate? Zachary pondered this question for days. Finally, he decided to simply show her what was in his heart. One Sunday afternoon, he arrived at the boarding house with his horse and a picnic basket. Sophia was hanging laundry in the yard, and she looked up in surprise when she saw him. He had helped her learn enough words that he could piece together simple sentences now. "Sophia, come with me," he asked, gesturing to his horse. "I want to show you something." She looked uncertain, then glanced at Catherine, who was watching from the porch. "Go on," Catherine said. "It is proper enough. Half the town knows you two are sweet on each other anyway." Sophia did not understand all the words, but she seemed to grasp the permission. She nodded and let Zachary help her onto his horse. He swung up behind her, and she tensed for a moment at the closeness, then relaxed against him as he guided the horse out of town. He took her to his favorite spot, a meadow high in the Ozark Hills where wildflowers grew thick and a stream bubbled over smooth stones. The view stretched for miles, showing the green valleys and distant peaks. Sophia gasped when she saw it, speaking rapidly in her own language, and he did not need a translation to know she found it beautiful. They sat on a blanket he spread near the stream, and he unpacked the simple meal he had brought. As they ate, he tried to tell her about his life. He pointed to the land and said, "My ranch, I have cattle. Cows." He made horns with his fingers and mooed, which made her laugh, a sound like music. She listened intently, and then she tried to tell him about herself. Her words were a mix of her language and the limited English she had learned. He caught Poland and understood that was where she was from. She pointed at herself and said family, then gestured far away. She made a motion like digging or working hard, and her face grew sad. He understood that life had been difficult, that she had left because she had to, not because she wanted to. When she finished, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "Sophia," he said carefully, I care about you. I want you to stay here, with me." She did not understand all the words, but she understood enough. She squeezed his hand and said something in her language that sounded like a question. He wished desperately that he could understand her, could hear her thoughts in words, instead of having to guess from expressions and tone. So he did the only thing he could think of. He tried to tell her through actions what he could not say in words. He picked a wildflower and tucked it behind her ear. He pointed at her, then at his heart, trying to show her that she had found a place there. And then, moving slowly to give her every chance to stop him, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and questioning. Sophia went still for a heartbeat, and then she was kissing him back, her hand coming up to touch his face. When they pulled apart, she was smiling, and there were tears on her cheeks, but they looked like happy tears. "Zach," she said, his name accented but clear. Then she pointed at herself and tried out the words he had used. "I care about you." His heart felt like it might burst. He pulled her close, and they sat there by the stream as the afternoon stretched into evening, holding each other and trying to communicate everything they felt through touch and looks and broken words. From that day forward, their relationship deepened. Zachary came to town every day, and they would walk together or sit on the boarding house porch or help Catherine with chores. Sophia's English improved steadily, and as it did, Zachary learned more about her. She had grown up in a small village in Poland, the youngest of 6 children. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother had struggled to feed them all. When a matchmaker had come through offering passage to America in exchange for agreeing to marry an American man, Sophia's mother had encouraged her to take it. It was a chance at a better life, a chance to escape the grinding poverty that had defined her existence. "I was scared," Sophia told him one evening as they sat on the porch swing. Her English was still halting but improving every day. "But I think America is better. I think maybe I find good life there." "And now?" Zachary asked. "What do you think now?" She looked at him, and the warmth in her eyes made him feel 10 feet tall. "Now I think I find more than good life. I think I find home." Zachary knew he wanted to marry her, but he also knew he needed to do it right. In late September, after she had been in Eureka Springs for nearly 2 months, he asked Catherine to help him plan a proper proposal. "You need to speak to her about it seriously," Catherine advised. "Make sure she understands what marriage here means, what her life would be like. She needs to choose this freely, not just because you rescued her from Crawford." Zachary knew his sister was right. The next Sunday, he took Sophia back to the meadow where they had first kissed. Her English was much better now, good enough for real conversation, though she still struggled with complex ideas. They sat by the stream, and Zachary took both her hands in his. "Sophia, I need to talk to you about something important." She looked nervous but nodded. "I listen." "I want to marry you," he said clearly. "I want you to be my wife, to live with me at my ranch, to build a life together. But I need to know that is what you want too, not just because you feel obligated to me for helping you." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was serious. "Zach, when I come to America, I think I must marry a man I do not know. I think this is my fate, to trade one hard life for maybe easier life, but still no choice. Then you help me, and for first time I have choice. I can choose my life." "And what do you choose?" Zachary asked, barely breathing. "I choose you," she said simply. "Not because you help me, because when I look at you I feel happy, safe. When I see you smile, I want to make you smile more. When you are not here, I miss you. This is love, yes." "Yes," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "That is love, and I feel the same way about you. From the moment I saw you step off that wagon, looking so lost and brave, I knew you were special. And every day since then, I have fallen more in love with you." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Then yes, I marry you. I want to be your wife. I want to make life with you." Zachary pulled a ring from his pocket. It had been his grandmother's, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my grandmother's. She was strong and kind like you. I would be honored if you would wear it." Sophia held out her hand, trembling, and Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She stared at it, then threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. They were married in the same church where Sophia had first arrived 3 months earlier. Catherine helped her make a simple white dress, and Zachary wore his best suit. Most of the town came to the wedding, curious about the mail-order bride who had chosen the cattle rancher over the wealthy banker. Sophia spoke her vows in careful English, her accent making the traditional words sound exotic and beautiful. When Zachary kissed her as his wife, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They moved to his ranch, a modest spread with a small house that Zachary had built himself 5 years earlier. It was not fancy, but it was sturdy and warm, and Sophia took to it immediately. She threw herself into making it a home, planting a garden, making curtains, cooking meals that blended her Polish heritage with American frontier food. The first few months of marriage were an adjustment. They were still learning each other's languages, both literally and figuratively. Sophia had never worked cattle before, but she was determined to help, and Zachary found himself teaching her to ride, to rope, to read the weather and the animals. She was a quick learner, fearless in a way that both impressed and terrified him. One evening in early December, after they had been married for 2 months, they were sitting by the fireplace after a long day of work. Snow was falling outside, the first real snow of the season, and Sophia was watching it with wide eyes. "In Poland we have much snow," she said, "but this is different. This is our snow, our first winter together." Zachary pulled her closer. "The first of many." She looked up at him. "Zach, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made him nervous. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said. Then, seeing his shocked expression, she hurried to add, "Is this okay?" "I know we are new married and maybe you want to wait, but—" Zachary kissed her, silencing her worried words. When he pulled back, he was grinning. "It is more than okay, it is wonderful. We are going to have a baby." "Yes," she said, smiling now too. "In the summer, I think. Maybe July." Zachary placed his hand on her still flat stomach, filled with wonder. "A baby, our baby." That winter was hard with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Zachary had never been happier. He and Sophia grew closer as they spent the long evenings by the fire, talking about their pasts, their dreams, their hopes for their child. Sophia's English improved rapidly, and Zachary even learned a few words of Polish, though he mangled the pronunciation so badly it made her laugh. In late January, trouble came in an unexpected form. Jacob Crawford had largely ignored them since Sophia and Zachary married, but apparently his resentment had been simmering. He began spreading rumors around town that Sophia was not legally free to marry Zachary, that the contract he had signed was not valid, that the marriage should be annulled. Sheriff Garrett came to the ranch one cold February morning to discuss the matter. Zachary invited him in, and Sophia made coffee while the sheriff explained the situation. "Crawford is making a lot of noise," Garrett said. "Claims you coerced the girl, that she did not understand what she was agreeing to when she married you. He is talking about taking it to a judge." Zachary felt fury rise in his chest. "That is nonsense. I paid him every cent he asked for. Sophia chose to marry me of her own free will." "I believe you," Garrett said, "but Crawford has money and influence. A judge might listen to him." Sophia, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Her English was confident now, with only a slight accent. "Sheriff, I understand what you say. I tell you, Mr. Crawford, lie. I choose Zach. I want to be his wife. No one forced me." Garrett looked at her appraisingly. "You speak English pretty well now, Mrs. Wilson." "I learned fast," Sophia said with a slight smile. "I am motivated." "If this goes to a judge, you will have to testify to that," Garrett warned. "I will," Sophia said firmly. "I am not afraid of Mr. Crawford." The case did go before Judge Thompson in March. The courtroom was packed with curious townspeople. Crawford had hired a lawyer from Little Rock, a slick man who argued that Sophia had been mentally and emotionally compromised when she agreed to marry Zachary, that she could not have understood the legal implications, that the marriage was therefore invalid. Zachary's lawyer, a local man named Peterson, was less polished but more sincere. He called Sophia to the stand, and she testified clearly and confidently. "Mrs. Wilson," Peterson asked, "did anyone force you to marry Zachary Wilson?" "No," Sophia said firmly. "I choose him." "When you arrived in Eureka Springs, you were intended to marry Mr. Crawford. Why did you not go through with that marriage?" Sophia looked directly at Crawford, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table. "When I meet Mr. Crawford, he treats me like I am property. He does not care what I think or feel. He only care that he buy wife and I should do what he want. When I meet Zach, he treat me like person. He help me when I am scared and alone. He give me choice. I choose to be with man who respect me. "And now," Peterson asked, "are you happy with your choice?" Sophia's hand went to her slightly rounded belly. "I am very happy. Zach is good husband. We build good life together. We are having baby in summer. This is my family now. This is my home." Crawford's lawyer tried to trip her up on cross-examination, asking complex questions designed to confuse her, but Sophia remained calm and clear. When he suggested that she had manipulated Zachary for money, she actually laughed. "Sir, Zach has ranch and some cows. He is not rich man. If I want money, I stay with Mr. Crawford. He has bank and big house. But I do not want money. I want love. I want respect. I find that with Zach." The judge was clearly moved. After brief deliberation, he ruled in favor of the Wilsons. "Mr. Crawford," Judge Thompson said, "you had a legal contract with Mrs. Wilson, and Mr. Wilson paid you in full to release that contract. Mrs. Wilson has testified credibly that she entered into her marriage of her own free will, and that she is happy with her choice. This court sees no grounds to annul the marriage. Case dismissed." As they left the courthouse, Sophia holding tight to Zachary's arm, Crawford stopped them on the steps. "You think you have won," he said bitterly, "but you threw away your future for her, Wilson. You will struggle on that ranch while I continue to prosper." Zachary looked at Sophia, who was watching him with trust and love in her eyes, then back at Crawford. "I did not throw away my future. I found it. I am sorry you cannot understand the difference between having money and being rich." They walked away, leaving Crawford sputtering on the courthouse steps. That night, lying in bed with Sophia curled against him, Zachary thought about Crawford's words. It was true that money was tight. Paying Sophia's passage debt had wiped out his savings, and building up the herd again was slow work. But when he looked at what he had, a woman he loved who loved him back, a baby on the way, a home they were building together, he knew he was wealthier than Crawford could ever understand. Spring came to the Ozarks in a riot of color and new life. Sophia's garden flourished, and so did she, her belly growing round with their child. She had never looked more beautiful to Zachary than she did working in her garden, dirt on her hands and face, talking to the plants in a mix of English and Polish. In late May, Catherine came to stay at the ranch to help when the baby came. The two women had become close, and Zachary was grateful for his sister's calm, competent presence. The baby came on a hot July night after a long, difficult labor. Zachary paced outside the bedroom, listening to Sophia's cries and feeling helpless. When Catherine finally emerged, she was smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and Sophia is fine, exhausted but fine." Zachary rushed into the room. Sophia was propped up on pillows, sweaty and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. Zachary approached slowly, overcome with emotion. "Our son," Sophia said softly. "He is beautiful, yes." Zachary thought the baby looked more like an angry potato than anything beautiful, but he nodded. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him William, after Zachary's father, with the middle name Thaddeus, after Sophia's father. Little Will was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little, but Zachary and Sophia navigated the challenges together, taking turns walking the floor at night, marveling over every small change and development. Watching Sophia with their son, Zachary sometimes thought back to that August day when she had arrived on the mail-order bride wagon, looking so lost and scared. Less than a year later, she was confident and strong, speaking fluent English, running their household, raising their son. She had adapted to frontier life with a determination that amazed him. One evening when Will was 3 months old, Zachary found Sophia sitting on the porch, rocking the baby and singing a Polish lullaby. He sat down beside her and listened to the unfamiliar words, made beautiful by her voice. When she finished, he asked, "What is the song about?" "It is about mother telling her baby about the stars," Sophia said. "How each star is a wish waiting to come true. My mother sang it to me when I was small." "Do you miss her?" Zachary asked. "Miss Poland?" Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I miss my mother, my sisters. I wonder if I will ever see them again. But Poland? No, I do not miss Poland. Poland was hard life, no future. Here I have everything. I have you, I have Will, I have home. When I was in Poland, I look at stars and make wishes, but I do not think they come true. Then I come here and I meet you, and all my wishes come true." Zachary put his arm around her, and they sat together watching the sun set over their land, their son sleeping peacefully between them. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. The ranch slowly prospered as Zachary built up his herd. Sophia became known in Eureka Springs for her excellent garden produce and her kindness to newcomers. She never forgot what it was like to be lost in a strange land, and she went out of her way to help others who found themselves in similar situations. When Will was 2 years old, Sophia became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Catherine, after Zachary's mother and his sister. Sarah was an easier baby than Will had been, cheerful and calm, and Will adored his little sister from the moment he met her. 2 years after Sarah came another son, Joseph, and then 2 years after that, twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth. Their small house burst at the seams with children and noise and life. Money was always tight with so many mouths to feed, but somehow they managed. Sophia was a genius at making a little stretch a long way, and Zachary worked harder than he ever had, expanding the ranch bit by bit. Through it all, their love for each other only deepened. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary took Sophia back to the meadow where he had first kissed her. Catherine watched the children, and for one afternoon they were just the two of them again. 10 years, Zachary said, holding her hand as they sat by the stream. "Can you believe it?" "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Sophia said. "I still remember how scared I was when I arrived, how alone. And then I see you across the street and you look at me like you see me. Not just body, not just work I can do, you see me." "Your eyes already told me enough," Zachary said, echoing words he had spoken that first day. "I saw your courage, your strength. I saw someone who had traveled so far, risked so much for a chance at something better. How could I not fall in love with that?" "And now," Sophia asked, "now that you know I snore and get grumpy when I am tired and burn the biscuits sometimes," Zachary laughed. "Now I love you even more. Because I know all of you, the strong parts and the vulnerable parts, the way you sing to the children in Polish when you think no one is listening, the way you put your whole heart into everything you do, the way you never give up, no matter how hard things get." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "When I was a young girl in Poland, I dream about love, but I think it is just dream, not real. I think real life is just about surviving. Then I meet you and you show me dreams can be real. You give me more than I ever dare to hope for." They renewed their vows that day, just the two of them by the stream, promising again to love and cherish each other for all their days. When they rode back to the ranch, to their children and their busy, chaotic, beautiful life, Zachary felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Jacob Crawford had married eventually, a widow from Little Rock who was as cold and calculating as he was. They had no children and lived in their big house with its fancy furniture and expensive drapes, and by all accounts, they were miserable together. Zachary sometimes saw Crawford in town and felt nothing but pity for him. Crawford had everything money could buy, but he had never learned that the things that mattered most could not be purchased. As the children grew, Sophia taught them about their Polish heritage, teaching them words and songs and stories from her homeland. But she also made sure they knew they were Americans, that this land, this town, this ranch was their home. The children grew up bilingual, switching effortlessly between English and Polish, and the older ones helped the younger ones learn both languages. Will grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved working cattle with his father. Sarah was gentle and artistic, always drawing or making things with her hands. Joseph was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the woods, giving his parents gray hairs with his daring. The twins, Emma and Elizabeth, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. In 1895, when Will was 13 and the youngest twins were 6, Sophia received a letter from Poland. It had taken months to arrive, passed from hand to hand across the ocean and the continent. The letter was from one of Sophia's sisters, and it brought news that their mother had died. Zachary found Sophia in the garden, the letter clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. He held her while she cried for the mother she had not seen in 13 years, for the impossibility of going home for the funeral, for all the years and miles that had separated them. "I never get to see her again," Sophia sobbed. "I never get to tell her about my life, show her my children. She die not knowing if I am happy or sad or even alive." "She knew," Zachary said firmly. "Mothers always know. She knew you were happy. She knew you were loved. That is why she encouraged you to come to America, is it not? She wanted you to have a better life than she had. You gave her that peace." Over the following weeks, Sophia wrote long letters to her sisters, telling them everything about her life in America. She sent photographs of the children, of the ranch, of Zachary. And slowly, the grief eased, replaced by gratitude for the years she had had with her mother and for the life her mother's sacrifice had made possible. That same year, the ranch had its best year ever. Zachary sold a large portion of his herd at excellent prices, and for the first time in their marriage, they had real savings. Sophia wanted to expand the house, and Zachary agreed. They added 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, giving everyone more space to breathe. As Zachary hammered and sawed, building the addition with his own hands and the help of neighbors, he thought about that day in 1882, when he had spent nearly all his savings to free Sophia from her contract with Crawford. It had seemed reckless at the time, financially foolish. But that single decision had led to this: a house full of children and laughter, a wife he loved more with each passing year, a life rich in all the ways that mattered. The children began to grow up and make their own ways in the world. Will married a nice girl from town and took over more of the ranch work, letting Zachary slow down a bit. Sarah married a teacher and moved to Little Rock, though she visited often. Joseph went west to Wyoming, writing letters full of adventure and new experiences. The twins married brothers and settled on neighboring farms just outside Eureka Springs, close enough to visit regularly. Through it all, Zachary and Sophia remained each other's constant. They had weathered droughts and floods, illness and loss, hard times and good times. They had raised 5 children and watched them become good, strong adults. They had built something that would last beyond their own lives. On their 30th anniversary in 1912, their children threw them a party. The house was packed with people, children, grandchildren, friends, neighbors. Catherine, now 72 but still sharp as ever, made a toast. 30 years ago, she said, my brother did the craziest thing I had ever seen. He spent everything he had to free a woman he had just met, a woman he could not even talk to. I thought he had lost his mind. But looking at them now, at this family they have built, at the love that still shines in their eyes when they look at each other, I realize it was not crazy at all. It was the sanest thing he ever did. To Zach and Sophia, who proved that love does not need words, just open hearts. Everyone raised their glasses, and Zachary looked at Sophia. She had lines around her eyes now, and silver threads in her dark hair, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day she stepped off that wagon. She caught him looking and smiled, that same smile that had first captured his heart 3 decades earlier. Later, when the party had wound down and it was just the two of them on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness, Sophia said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What is that?" "I think about what my life would be if I marry Crawford instead, if you do not help me that day. I think I would be in that big house on the hill, but I would be so lonely, so empty inside. Maybe I have nice dresses and servants, but I would not have this." She gestured to the house behind them, full of the sounds of their children and grandchildren settling in for the night. "I would not have love." "You would have found your way," Zachary said. "You are too strong not to." "Maybe," Sophia said, "but I am glad I do not have to know. I am glad I have this life, this love. When I was a young girl in Poland, I think love is luxury for rich people or lucky people. I think for people like me, life is just about surviving. But you show me that is not true. You show me that love is not luxury. Love is what makes life worth living." Zachary pulled her close. "You showed me that too. Before you, I had a good life. I had my ranch, my work, my sister, but I did not have joy. I did not have someone to share it all with. You gave me that. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently on the swing. From inside the house came the sound of one of the twins laughing at something Will said, and a baby, one of the grandchildren, cooing happily. These were the sounds of the life they had built together, a life that started with a frightened woman stepping off a wagon and a cowboy who saw past the language barrier to the person beneath. "Tell me again," Sophia said softly. "Tell me what you think that first day when you see me." Zachary smiled. They had played this game many times over the years, but it never got old. "I thought, that is the bravest woman I have ever seen. She has traveled thousands of miles to a place she does not know, to marry a man she has never met, and she stands there looking scared but not defeated. I thought, if I let her go with Crawford, I will regret it for the rest of my life. And when I look at you," Sophia prompted. "You thought, who is this tall cowboy staring at me?" Zachary said, making her laugh. "But then our eyes met, and you saw someone who wanted to help, not hurt. You saw someone who would keep you safe." "Yes," Sophia said. "I see all that in your eyes. Before you even speak, before I even know your name, I see kind man. Good man. That is why I trust you when you take me to Catherine. That is why I choose you over Crawford. My eyes tell me you are right man, even when I cannot understand your words." "Your eyes already told me enough," Zachary said, repeating the words that had become their private phrase, shorthand for the connection that had drawn them together from the first moment. As the years went on, Zachary and Sophia settled into the rhythm of older age. They took daily walks around the property, Zachary pointing out changes and improvements, Sophia commenting on how the garden was doing. They spent evenings on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Their children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren and later great-grandchildren, and the house Zachary had built with his own hands rang with multiple generations of family. Sophia had become a beloved figure in Eureka Springs. She was known for her kindness, her wisdom, and her remarkable story. Young women would come to her for advice, and she would tell them about courage and choice, about finding love in unexpected places, about building a life with patience and determination. In 1920, when Zachary was 64 and Sophia was 61, they sat on the porch on a warm spring evening, Zachary had slowed down considerably, his body worn from years of hard work, but his mind was still sharp and his love for Sophia still burned bright. "We have had a good life," he said, taking her hand. "The best life," Sophia agreed. "When I arrive in America, I am so scared. I think maybe I make terrible mistake. Then you smile at me, and everything change." "God knew what he was doing when he brought you to me," Zachary said. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am grateful every day." "You deserve me because you are good man," Sophia said firmly. "You see person, not property. You give freedom, not control. You love with whole heart. That is why you deserve happiness." Zachary raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will remember that you were the best thing that ever happened to me, that every sacrifice was worth it, that I would make the same choices all over again." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I promise. And you promise me something too." "What is that?" "Promise me you remember that you saved my life. Not just from Crawford, but from life with no love, no choice, no joy. You give me everything I never dare to dream. You are my miracle." "I promise," Zachary said, his own voice thick with emotion. They sat there as the sun set, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful together. Around them, the ranch they had created hummed with quiet life. Cattle lowing in the distance, chickens settling for the night, the creek bubbling over stones. Inside the house, photographs lined the walls, capturing decades of memories. Wedding days and birthdays, new babies and graduations, family gatherings and quiet moments. In 1925, Zachary's health began to fail. His heart had never been the same after a bout of pneumonia the previous winter, and the doctor said there was nothing to be done but rest and wait. Zachary faced his mortality with the same quiet courage he had faced everything else in his life. Sophia refused to leave his side. Their children urged her to rest, but she would not hear of it. "I spend 33 years at this man's side," she said. "I will not leave him now." On a clear October morning, with Sophia holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Zachary Wilson took his last breath. His final words were, "I see you, Sophia. I still see you." Sophia was 66 when she became a widow, and her grief was profound, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support. She continued to live in the ranch house, tending her garden and welcoming visitors, keeping Zachary's memory alive through stories and love. She lived another 15 years, watching her great-grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Will's management, maintaining the home she and Zachary had built together. She never remarried. When people asked why, she would smile and say, "I had the great love of my life." Some people never have that even once. I am greedy to want it twice. In 1940, at the age of 81, Sophia died peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Zachary on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Sophia Mazur Wilson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She traveled across the world and found home in love." At her funeral, the church was packed. 5 children, 19 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren mourned her passing, along with what seemed like half the town. The current pastor, a young man who had only known Sophia in her later years, spoke about her kindness and strength. But it was Will, now 63 years old himself, who told the real story. "My mother came to this country with nothing but a small bag and a lot of courage," he said. "She did not speak the language. She did not know the customs. She was supposed to marry a man who saw her as property. But my father saw her differently. He saw her strength, her goodness, her heart, and she saw the same in him. They could not speak to each other at first, but they did not need words. Their eyes told them everything they needed to know. He paused, looking at the photograph of his parents on their 50th anniversary, arms around each other, still clearly in love. They built something beautiful together. Not just this ranch, not just our family, but a partnership based on respect and love and mutual sacrifice. My father gave up his savings to free my mother. My mother gave up her homeland to build a new life. And together, they created something that will last for generations. Will looked out at the gathered crowd, at all the descendants of Zachary and Sophia, at the friends and neighbors whose lives they had touched. We are all here because two people looked at each other across a language barrier and saw not obstacles, but possibilities. Because a cowboy decided that a lost woman's eyes told him everything he needed to know about her character. Because a frightened girl chose courage over safety. They showed us all what love really means. As the funeral ended, and people filed past the casket, many stopped to touch the photograph of Zachary and Sophia, to pay tribute to a love story that had become legendary in Eureka Springs. The Polish mail-order bride who had built a life in the Ozarks, and the cowboy who had seen past language to the person beneath, had left a legacy that would endure. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story. They would talk about how Sophia arrived in Eureka Springs not speaking a word of English, how Zachary had bankrupted himself to free her, how their eyes had told them everything they needed to know before words ever could. They would talk about the ranch that still stood, now expanded and prosperous, about the traditions Sophia had started that were still maintained, about the love that had built something lasting. The meadow where Zachary had first kissed Sophia became a family gathering place. Generations of Wilson descendants would propose there, would renew their vows there, would scatter ashes there. It became sacred ground, a reminder that love could overcome any obstacle, even the barrier of language. In the ranch house, now preserved as part of the family heritage, Sophia's garden still bloomed each spring, maintained by whichever family members were living there at the time. The photographs still lined the walls, telling the story of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. And on the hillside where they were buried, visitors would often find wildflowers placed at the headstones, left by people who had heard their story and been moved by it. The flowers were a tribute to a love that transcended language, to a cowboy who looked beyond words, to a bride who spoke no English but whose eyes had told him everything he needed to know. Their story became a reminder that love is not about perfect communication or shared backgrounds or similar experiences. It is about seeing someone, really seeing them, and choosing to build something together despite the obstacles. It is about courage and sacrifice and faith that the connection you feel is real, even when logic says it should not be. Zachary and Sophia Wilson had taken a chance on each other, had chosen love over practicality, had built a life on a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection. And in doing so, they had created not just a family, but a legacy that whispered to future generations. Be brave enough to follow your heart, be open enough to see past surface differences, be willing to sacrifice for what truly matters. Their story proved that sometimes, your eyes can tell you everything you need to know. That sometimes, the connection between two souls is so strong it needs no translation. That sometimes, the best decisions are the ones that make no logical sense, but feel absolutely right in your heart. And in the end, is that not what love is all about? Not the practical considerations or the logical arguments, but the moment when two people look at each other and just know. Know that this is right. Know that this is worth fighting for. Know that no matter what obstacles stand in the way, together they can overcome them. Zachary and Sophia knew that from the moment their eyes met across a dusty street in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And they spent the rest of their lives proving it true, one day at a time, building a love that would echo through generations and inspire countless others to be brave enough to follow where their hearts led. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and loss. But it also ended with triumph, with a family that spanned generations, with a love that had proven stronger than distance or language or circumstance. It ended with the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that? To love and be loved, to build something lasting, to touch lives and hearts in ways that endure long after you are gone. Zachary and Sophia achieved all of that and more. Their eyes had told them enough, all those years ago on a hot August day. And they had spent a lifetime proving that sometimes the language of the heart is the only one that truly matters.